to our first marketing webinar hosted by Domain Computer Services. We're taking a little bit of a break from the tech content this month. So today's topic is audio, the future of content marketing. We have an exciting panel of 3 podcast hosts from different industries, starting with Anthony DeGraw, the host of Discussions by Domain, Chrishan, Wright, the host of Blaxit Global Podcast, and Tara Thurber, the host of the Top 5 podcast. So like I said, they come from 3 different backgrounds, and they're going to talk about their podcasts and the resources that they provide to the specific communities that they're reaching with their audience. So we're going to start off the podcast with about 40 minutes of an open discussion. I'm going to be moderating the panel. I'm going to leave this screen up the whole time. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about these podcasts, seeing how you can listen to them, or trying to connect with some of these hosts to learn more about their topics, just feel free to check out these links up here. And then after we have this open discussion, we're going to move to the Q&A. So the cool feature about Zoom webinar is you can see there's a Q&A tab. So we're going to save the second half of this discussion for open Q&A, so you can ask a question to the whole panel, or if you would like, you can directly ask one of the podcast hosts a question. And then at the end, we are actually giving away 2 pairs of AirPod Pros. So maybe you want to ask some questions, because if you're engaging with us, you'll look good for the giveaway. So, all right, we're going to start off with introducing our 3 panelists. So Anthony, if you want to go first and talk a little bit about Discussions by Domain, then we'll move to Chrishan and then Tara.
Awesome, Brianna, thank you so much for doing this and setting it up and being the host of this. This is going to be awesome. This is more in my wheelhouse than the deep end tech and cyber that we usually talk about, and one of our passion projects here at Domain. So we started our podcast, Discussions by Domain, back on April 15th of 2019. And we actually read a step-by-step guide. It was called the 27 Steps to Start Your Own Podcast. And they laid it out for us. And I think the thought there was that nobody was going to go through 27 steps to actually launch their own podcast. And Tyler Daniels, our podcast producer, and I, week by week, we did 3 to 5 of the steps, and we just kept progressing. And then the second piece of it was, one of the stats we had heard was that 90-something% of podcasts never get past 6 episodes. So I went to Tyler and said, before we even launch, we are going to have 6 episodes recorded. That make sure we're not another statistic in this podcast. So that's what we did. And the whole thought process here, I would have loved to say we predicted pandemic and a need a different way to connect with people. We definitely did not predict the pandemic, nor do we wish that ever happened. But by launching in 2019, we were actually able to get up to close to 100 episodes by the time the pandemic and what we're living in right now. And the whole point of it, when we started it, was to say, we're having all these great conversations with business leaders, people doing their own thing, people part of larger organizations, at chambers of commerces, or NJBIA, or all these different events and organizations we're a part of. How can we take those 10 to 15 minute intimate one-on-one conversations at these events and produce them to a larger audience, get those insights of these experts out there, right? I think there's so many times where we don't use providers or experts in our backyard because we just don't simply know they exist unless we're out and about. So that was the idea behind Discussions by Domain, was to interview a ton of experts in the Northeast region here and get those insights out to the larger audience and population, and use social media channels to distribute that message.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Now we're going to move to Chrishan to hear a little bit about Blaxit Global.
Sure, so glad to be here. It's funny listening to Anthony talk about, the podcast statistics, not making it past 6 or 7. And when I think about my podcasting journey, it really started in 2013, 2014, when I had the original concept for a podcast. I entered a statewide contest in New Jersey, was one of the finalists, called myself doing a podcast. And by podcast, it was interviewing people and publishing it on YouTube. And I thought like that was it. And could not keep up even with the two. So I took a step back. Fast forward to 2020, August 2020, when Blaxit Global launched. But the journey to where Blaxit Global is now, it is very different from what I originally conceived in 2013, 2014. That first foray was really about women entrepreneurs. And like I said, I took a step back and wasn't sure if podcasting was for me. And it was really through the pandemic and being, everything that we're feeling, right? The change in routine, but then coupled with the fact that on my own personal journey, which I explore in the Blaxit Global podcast, I was preparing to move abroad in 2023 when my youngest graduates high school. And underneath the backdrop of the global pandemic, the civil and racial unrest, my circle felt like it was coming closer and closer in and not feeling connected to anyone. And with that, I was having sleep disturbances and things like that. And I just knew I had to redirect that energy into something positive. So fortunately for me, even when I look at this whole journey, one of the competitors that was in that original competition in 2014 actually launched her podcast in 2019 and created a course on how to start a podcast and asked me if I was interested. And I was like, maybe this is that solve to now, feed that creative journey for me. So I did, I enrolled, but at that time, I still wasn't sure what was going to be that passion that lit me up because, I think to get past that 6 or 7 as podcasters, we know it's not just doing the audio, it's all of the things afterwards. It's, the promotion, it's talking to guests, it's all the behind the scenes that most people don't experience. So I knew I had to have something that was going to fuel me past all of those hurdles that come along the journey. So for me, I spent a lot of time planning my Blaxit or looking at my finances to prepare for my Blaxit. So I knew it was one of the two. And so I narrowed in on featuring the stories of incredible Black expats around the diaspora who've taken the road less traveled, who from fear or frustration decided to chart a new path. And in Blaxit Global, we feature these incredible stories of transformation to inspire and empower others. So each time I have a conversation with a guest, I take away some piece of knowledge and inspiration, and I hear the feedback from our community that's grown to thousands around the world. And it's inspired other people who either may have never thought about moving abroad or who have tried in the past and failed to really have the fuel from the community and these other stories that show representation and inspire them to take action. So that's really why and how it got started.
Thank you, Chrishan. Now let's hear from Tara.
Sorry about that. Thanks for having me on today. I'm super excited to share top 5. I'm the Director of Talent Innovation at Define Talent, and we actually launched a brand new division, believe it or not, right in the beginning of this global pandemic, right where we just came up on a year. And over the course of the year, we've, as a recruiting agency within the industry, we're talking to clients and people of so many different levels and industries that fast forward to December of 2020, we wanted to put together a podcast. We launched our podcast just in January of 2021 to really reach out to clients and individuals to share their stories, to talk about the struggles that they're having, whether they're searching for work or searching for talent, how to bring wellness into companies, and really just share their stories throughout the industry and make an impact. We actually just hit our 10th episode, so super excited about that. And we've got a calendar of really awesome people that are coming down our pipeline that, you know, whether it's a startup or whether it's a local business or whether it's a larger business trying to make an impact out there right now, finding just helping people have their voice and share their experiences, share their trials, their successes over the past of this year, and how they've transitioned or pivoted within this digital age now. And sharing that with all viewers, different audiences, is really our core purpose, just to get it out there and to let everybody know that there is a new reality out there and we're all here sharing it together.
Thank you, Tara. That was so powerful. So my first question was going to be, how did you get started with podcasting? But we kind of heard a little bit from all you three how that happened. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and say, did you expect that you would ever start a podcast? I know Chrishan said that she didn't really expect it and it helped her find her passion. But Anthony and Tara, did you think that in your career this would be something that you were hoping to do?
Tara, I'll let you go first on that.
You know, to be honest, no. It was something that I've always had a deep fire within me to just share my words and my knowledge or my experiences. You know, when we came up with the idea, I was nervous at first, to be brutally honest. You know, talking to the conversations that I have, you know, at the end of conversations that aren't recorded, I would be like, man, that content was gold. And, you know, when we really came up with the idea to start the podcast, I was, let's jump right in. Let's dive into it. It's been an awesome experience and I wouldn't go back by any means. I feel that by utilizing this form to express and to share and to get it out there, because we're not networking in person. We're not having those in-person conversations. So by creating this podcast, we're able to take these conversations and share them with so many more people than even just being in a room. So it's been an awesome experience. And, you know, I'm pretty excited that we've started it and we're off to a great start so far.
Yeah, I would second that. I definitely did not I didn't come to Domain and think that we're going to start a podcast and all of this. It was really for me, it was a pulse on, I look up to a lot of the software as a service firms. And the reason I do that is they have significant investments that they're getting from investors. And therefore they're able to try and do new things. And that's not specifically the amount, we don't have that type of a budget, right? So I was always trying to they're innovating at a much higher level than we can, but how can we take some of the things that they do and implement it here? And I think the podcast enticed me because it was a way to get people together and develop more personal relationships. Pre-pandemic, we thought that we offered guests two different ways to do this. We said we could record a Zoom like we're doing right now, or you can come in person to our podcast studio and check out our facilities, which was a basic room office that we had converted in with some cameras and whatnot. It wasn't too complex. And we thought everybody was going to tell us they didn't want to travel and they'd rather just do it on Zoom or they'd be afraid or scared to be in front of a camera. We found that 95% of people, when we put that out there, wanted to do it in person. And it was just such a good way to connect with that individual. Yes, we wanted to get their content and their expertise, and we were interested in it. But we also wanted, as Domain or Anthony or whoever, wanted to do that. Similar to probably the other two, I was extremely nervous when starting this out. It definitely has gotten a little bit easier for me, but even today, there's some basic anxiety in trying to get all the tech to work and things like that. But if you go back and look, I think my first episode was with our marketing director, Adele Strauss, and we're sitting on one of the random couches at Domain. And it is just super awkward. But if you look at that and then you look at one of our most recent episodes and you can see the big difference, or even what we're doing today with these two ladies, it's amazing. So yeah, we did not set out to do it, but it has been great moving forward. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And even if, you didn't start out to do it, this is my next question. Do you think that anyone has the ability to start their own podcast?
I think we should go with Chrishan on that because she can help them out.
Yes, I think anyone can start a podcast. I think you really need to be focused on who you're going after and your why. Because again, as I mentioned, if you're not clear on your why you're doing it, you're not going to bring that excitement, that enthusiasm that gets people to want to engage with you if you're having a podcast that has, other people on as guests, or if you're doing it solo, to come up with it. You have to have something to motivate you on the days that you don't want to record because you have a lot going on, or you're looking at your download numbers and you're thinking, is anybody other than my mom listening? So being clear on your why is going to tremendously make change. And then for your listener, I think sometimes, and not to digress too much, people get focused on, oh, I should have 10,000 downloads or whatever. Pay attention to the one listener. Be very grateful for them opting in and having that relationship with them when they're in the midst of a car ride or something else going on in their life, that they're choosing to listen to you and what you have to say. And so that for me is the centerpiece of my podcast marketing course, Beyond the Launch, because I wanted to help people. There's a lot of no shortage of classes to train you how to launch a podcast, the mechanics of it. But the part that I see people struggle with is how to sustain, how to grow, how to monetize. And that's something that I've been able to do with my show, I think in part because by profession, I'm a digital marketing expert. And so I brought that skill set to then build Blaxit Global as a brand in the beginning. And so, yes, I'm iterating as I go along, but I think it's very, very important for people to be clear on their why, understand their target audience. And, I will be here to help, with the whole sustaining.
Awesome. Yeah, I would add something to that too, is that everybody has a voice, right? Everybody has a voice. Everybody has something unique. And you may think you don't, but the answer is you do. And even on ours, like we'll go the gamut of, we'll talk, everybody may come and say like, oh, this is run by a technology company. They're probably only going to talk about technology and cybersecurity. And we've had people come on and talk about sales, marketing, employee benefits, mental health. And I know the three of us in our prep for this talked about just the ability for audio or podcasting where there's something going on in the marketplace, in the world, and it pertains to you specifically and what you talk about with your audience. And on a dime, you can flip and get somebody on, talk about it, record it, and then get it out there. I think that's super interesting, and the ability to expand the network. One thing before I lose the train of thought, though, is we actually Brianna and I met Chrishan teaching at a course at Rutgers around marketing and what the future looks like. That's how we even met each other, was the three of us got invited to go attend a Rutgers class and talk about this exact subject. And now I think maybe a month or two later, we're all together talking about this too. So I want to forget that.
Yeah, so grateful for that connection, because we've also just learned a lot from Chrishan that we can even implement in our own podcast. So she's a great teacher. And another thing that Chrishan even said was, the beauty of audio content is you're meeting your listener where they are, whether they're in the car, if they're cooking dinner, if they're taking a walk with their kid. I just think that this type of content is so valuable to reach the listener wherever they are in their life. So thank you for that. And I'm going to go to my next question, which is, how often are you guys releasing your podcast content? And what other social channels are you using this content to share to? So let's start with Tara. We haven't heard from her in a while.
Sure. So in the beginning, we were actually releasing a podcast once a week. We've pulled it back a little bit to start sharing the podcast bi-weekly. We really wanted to let the podcast that we were putting out there to sit and resonate with our audience, try and get it out to more people and giving it some time to really grow. We really discovered that when we promote a podcast leading up to the release, we're more likely to increase listeners and downloads. And then, it continues because once it's released, we've noticed that a lot more people, it's hitting more people. It's starting to spider web out. For us, we are sharing our podcasts on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we're always trying to make sure we're tagging our guests, our businesses, the organizations that we're talking to as much as possible, just to try and keep continuing to reach the larger audience rather than just our immediate network.
Yeah, for us, it's our goal was to do one a week since 4/15/19. Luckily, we've kept up with that. It is a lot of work, and I can completely even just learn something from Tara right there on promoting it prior to it even going live. We have not been really doing that. So that's an interesting take as well. Or at least we do it like the day before with a 2-minute clip. I think we could probably try and get out and let it resonate. And I wanted to say like grow legs and go off into the distance, right? So we have stayed consistent with the once a week. That being said, I would say at probably right around 90, we said it was right around the holidays and we said, should we take a week off here? Should we take 2 weeks off? It is a full-blown production. Like I mentioned, we have a full-time employee. His name's Tyler Daniels. He's our podcast producer, and he owns this from start to finish. I do somewhat of a pre-interview, 10 to 15 minutes, get to know the guest, create a topic, 3 to 5 questions to kind of steer the meeting. And then I do the recording like we're doing right now, and then I pass the buck off to Tyler. So I am blessed that we have Tyler and then the whole marketing team behind to really generate and get that out. I do know it's a lot of work though. So if you don't have that infrastructure built, I would probably recommend to go a little bit slower so you stay consistent for longer.
Yeah, and for me, I'm 8 months in, and from the outset, I knew every 2 weeks was going to be something that was sustainable. And to Tara's comment about promotion, it just gives the episode room to breathe. It gives my guests time to promote on their channels. And then also it gives me the opportunity to test and learn. So I use Facebook, Instagram, email, LinkedIn as well. We have the Blaxit Global Facebook community. So I utilize that, and then they share it out in their network. So it's great from that perspective. But really, I believe in like starting with the end in mind. And so with that, I did season 1. I did about 10 or 11 episodes. And then now I'm in season 2, which should be ending sometime around May. And then we'll take another 6 to 8 week hiatus. And this just gives the audience, time to digest, time for me to take a breather, because I had to be realistic about it. I've hired an editor this season and I batch record, which makes things super easy because these are episodes that I recorded in the fall, some that I sprinkled in that I recorded recently, but it just gives me the opportunity to be more strategic and intentful. So when I'm looking at maybe the way the flow of the show is coming together, and maybe I have, too many guests that are talking about one topic, I can like move them around, or if someone cancels at the last minute, I'm not scrambling. And so it just gives me the opportunity to be very thoughtful and measured in my approach.
I love that. I think the whole team just learned something from the domain side, which we will start to execute on, and it'll take some pressure off as well, which is nice. On the social media side, I did want to add one thing because I completely forgot that piece of the question. LinkedIn, and I think this Chrishan had mentioned, knowing your audience and where they live. LinkedIn for domain as a B2B service provider has been the best social channel. But LinkedIn specifically, the company pages are starting to grow. We're seeing the algorithms start to change a little bit where they're giving the company pages more of a reach. That being said, we still see the biggest reach from personal profiles like myself. So I would, whether you're the host or you're a team member on that team, writing up, somewhat of a text post with a short clip video or a text post with an image, as Tara mentioned, tagging all the right individuals. I've seen some of my posts get upwards of 1,000, 1,200 views on some things, which for me is pretty decent. Most of them average like 300 to 600 views. So as long as you're out there and connecting with your target audience, I like to call them lurkers. You have lurkers on Facebook. You definitely have lurkers on LinkedIn who are scared to post or share their expertise. And what we've seen is on inbound sales conversations, people mentioning, hey, who's ever doing your LinkedIn is doing a great job. And the answer is yes, they are, but that content is coming from these conversations.
Yeah, so this actually brought me to another question that I wasn't going to ask, but it's really important because we're talking about, how do you stay consistent? How often are you releasing the content? But we have to remember, to be able to release the content, you need to have the guests on your podcast. So how do you guys find guests in your target audience? And also, have looking for guests brought you any other opportunities for your podcast?
I can start with that. It's brought me more than I thought. When I started this, I was like, okay, I'm in the US. My podcast is about people all over the world. I don't know many people who live in other countries. So I started with, somebody who is in my network, actually a friend of a friend. And then it took off like wildfire. So people were, saying, oh, connecting me to different people in different parts of the world. I always have to manage time zones because of my show. So I'm talking to people in Bali, that's 13 hours. I'm talking to people in the UK, so no matter where they are in the world, I always have to like adjust, either our pre-conversations or even our recording sessions, especially when I'm dealing with someone who is based in Asia and making sure I'm mindful of the huge time difference. So that's been really interesting for me, but thankfully it's been word of mouth. That said, Blaxit Global, much to my surprise, also received a lot of big press. I think a lot was going on, as we know, with the backdrop of the presidential election. And as I mentioned, all the things that really served as the impetus for the podcast. So we've been featured in Huffington Post, Houston Chronicle, and other journals and other podcasts, and also through alliances. And so one of the alliances that I've been able to really build is with the Black Travel Alliance. And so that has been beneficial to me. I've also moved into some affiliate relationships with different content creators. So that's really been helpful to not only bring different people who have an expertise in a particular area to the Blaxit Global community, and we have workshops usually 2 times a month that'll talk about a different topic, like building your finances for your move abroad, or my latest episode is how you can live for free as a house sitter. And so that one's our most popular one, at least in terms of the workshop. But it's just, having people think outside the box. So for me, it just gives me a time to like sit and digest, like, okay, what are the critical things that people need to know? And or what are the things that I'm personally working on that I think would be impactful to my audience? And then from there, it just snowballs and people, tag me in posts. I've actually started to really track my own podcast hashtag, because people will take photos and they'll use Blaxit Global's hashtag. And now I'm finding content that I can then leverage on my social channels. So I think, really taking a step back and looking and designing a digital marketing strategy can yield some big fruit, not only in terms of listenership, but also media opportunities for sure.
Tara, any notes on how you find your guests? That you've had you just had somebody in boxing on, right?
Yeah. And I'm writing down notes because I'm learning here as we go right now. It's been, for the past 3 months, as a recruiting agency and as a connector, our networks are out there, and it's been all about connecting with individuals. And to my surprise too, when I ask somebody if they'd like to be on the podcast, they say yes, and they want to do it. They want to share their successes or their stories, which for me, that I think that that's something, at first I was nervous about asking people, but once you start rolling and you come up, you know, with your own personal growth and what you're getting out of your podcast. And then when you're exploring it and asking other individuals, it's really eye-opening, because people do want to share. People want to, you know, I talk about brand recognition a lot, and, you know, helping I'm all about helping other people. So it's, you know, we're targeting different types of people and everybody wants to chat. So why not throw it onto a podcast and get it out there to even more people? And we're talking with people like Anthony just said, somebody out of, you know, Andy Stern was on our podcast from Rumble Boxing. We spoke to the CEO of Work Genius, a freelancing platform, down to Allison Arden, who does the Elements of Us. Like, there's just to some life coaches that we've been talking to. So I think definitely having somewhat of a strategy or a layout of where you want to take the podcast is important. And then just exploring it from there, and not holding boundaries too. I feel that speaking with so many different types of individuals and not having set boundaries, it's what I've noticed is everything has come together on its own. And just over the past 3 months, I've seen a theme, and speaking to people of totally different industries, we've all come back to that main theme of which I had mentioned yesterday, of authenticity. And I think by having a podcast, we all need to show up authentic from the gate. We all need to show up real, because, you know, there's no mask. You can't put a mask on when you're podcasting or interviewing and putting yourself out there. So.
Yeah, I think even taking that step further, right, with the recordings and podcasting, you can do some editing. But as we're doing right now, live, we can't edit anything, right? This is as real as it gets. It's as authentic as it gets. Yep. Can't imagine what's going on the Facebook and YouTube channels, right? So on our end, how we initially got guests and how I would recommend some people think about this is you have easily 6 to 10 people in your immediate network that you have really good long-standing relationships with, that you probably have, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or monthly conversations with. Just think about recording those, right? Hey, instead of doing this at the coffee shop, maybe we do it at the coffee shop, but instead of doing it there, why don't we get coffee together, bring it in-house, and just start recording? And let's see what we can make of it, because our conversations are usually pretty insightful. So that's how we got our first 6 to 10 initial episodes. Then for our business, the way we looked at it next is, who do we want to connect with? Who's our next best relationship? Where are they going to come from? And for us, it was, what are the traits of companies that we want to be associated with that? And we started to look at all the lists. The stat is out there, right? Best places to work, fastest growing, best culture. There's all types of lists out there about people who are putting themselves out there, getting on these lists and making some of what we call operational maturity type of decisions about their businesses. That's who we wanted to be associated with. And if they're doing those types of things, they're definitely interested on sharing their mission. And we like to say, like, when I talk with a guest in a pre-conversation, I say, look, guests come on and talk about their area of expertise all the time. But we also have guests come on and talk about their passion projects. Yeah. You may be the best employment lawyer out there, but maybe you want to talk about the charity or the nonprofit organization that you're putting in, 18 hours of work on the weekends with. I don't know, but I want it to be all about you, and then let my curiosity generate questions based on how we go. So that's kind of how we've thought about our initial guests, and then where do we want to go with that?
Yeah, I love this dialogue, because also as you have more guests on, people are going to literally ask you to be on the podcast because they like what you're doing. So yeah. I think it's really exciting. And my last question I'm going to ask before I move into some of these Q&A questions we have queued up. Are you guys on Clubhouse, and what do you think of it as a networking tool?
So I think Anthony is on Clubhouse. I have not attended anything on Clubhouse. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm still trying to figure out TikTok and learning things on there and how it potentially plays for domain and understanding. But I think I'll just answer this baseline is I always want to understand the different platforms, right? It was Facebook, then it quickly moved to Instagram was the biggest channel. Now there's a LinkedIn, now you have TikTok, now you have Clubhouse. I think we can't, at least my approach to it is don't dismiss them. There's a reason they're popping. There's a reason they're gaining attention. There's a reason people like them. Understand what that is. And if they're going to be here a year or 6 years from now, I don't know. But there's some aspect of that platform that people like and they engage with. So let's try and understand it. And one of the biggest things I like about podcasting is we call it pillar content internally at Domain. I know that's an external concept as well, where we can shoot this hour-long video with 2 other experts. And this is long form. We can go get a transcription of this. We can break this up into different pieces. We can make written content out of it. We can make short video clips out of it. We can make additional audio content. There's so much stuff we can do with chopping this up and then distributing it across all these different different places, media outlets, right? And I think the key is just making sure that the clip or the piece of content you want to distribute plays well on that platform that you're distributing.
Yeah, and I'm on Clubhouse. A friend of mine, actually my first guest, who's in Bali, was pinging me and like, "Oh, Chrishan, you have to get on Clubhouse." And it sat well for me because as an introvert, podcasting works. I'm not usually on video as much. So that worked well. And then I guess because of the theme of the show, I was getting pulled on stage in different rooms. Sometimes I prefer to be in the audience, but it was great because I'm also in a mastermind and a couple of us got together and we did a welcome party and just wanted to get through like the mechanics of Clubhouse. And granted, Clubhouse is in beta. It's still evolving. It's evolving because users are finding different ways to engage with the tool. And I think my habit on Clubhouse is very similar to how my habit is for podcasting. I rarely, with the exception of one other show, listen to podcasts in my own genre. I tend to listen to business podcasts and finance podcasts. And so that's similar in Clubhouse, where I listen more to conversations around business or even languages, because I'm thinking about where I want to be in the world. So it's great, at least for me, from an information gathering perspective. But I also had to be very disciplined in my use of Clubhouse because my observation and, as a digital marketer, I will say I'm not always the first mover on a platform, but I was observing rooms and people would be in there for hours, if not days. And I knew that it could be a time suck. So I didn't have notifications on. I was very, careful about where I wanted to be and how I wanted to be seen on the app, just because I didn't want to get pulled away from things that were really important to me. But I think, we'll see as Clubhouse evolves the utility. It does not have that evergreen factor that podcasting has, where you can divide your content and put it in different places. So it's very like real time in the moment. So I think that has an attraction to a lot of people. But we'll see how it evolves. But I'm here for the ride. You can find me on Clubhouse.
For Define Talent and Top 5, we're not on Clubhouse yet. I'm kind of taking it from the ground and learning from you guys right now about Clubhouse. I felt since it's still in the honeymoon phase, we're just kind of holding back and just waiting to see what the benefits are, what the consequences of yet another social platform would be. We want to help educate and reach as many people as possible. So I'm definitely considering, I want to check it out. Of course, I'm in for the ride. I'll try anything at this point just to see where it can take us. But we haven't approached it yet.
Yeah, I think it's something we're all still learning because, my manager, Adele, she actually referred me to the platform. So I was looking at it as a professional opportunity. Then you go in and look at some of the rooms and people are talking about like literally anything and everything. And I'm just like, I really don't know what this is yet. So let's just kind of watch and like Anthony said, just understand the tool and if we can and should use it for our audience. So I think that's really interesting. But all right, great. So now we're going to move to some Q&A. Some of these questions kind of overlap a little bit, so I might combine them. So John Blackburn is asking, how do you monetize your podcasts? And then John Dry is asking, how do you get sponsors for your podcast? So I feel like this kind of overlaps a little bit. Anthony may be able to touch on the monetizing part, and I think Chrishan is definitely the one to talk about the sponsorships.
Yeah, so we don't look to monetize the podcast in the essence of getting paid sponsorships. Maybe that will happen down the road. I am cautious of that because that was not the intent. Domain runs a very successful, profitable business in the main thing that we do. I don't think we need to make a couple bucks in our world and the effort that would go into that. Say we got a technology vendor. Say we got Microsoft to sponsor it or provide some insights, or a Sonic Wall firewall, right? Right now, that's not the intention. The way we do utilize it, though, to garner better relationships and business opportunities is by interviewing our best next customer. I'll be straight as day. We're going out there and identifying professional service firms with areas of expertise that fit operational maturity levels we're looking for, that we want to interview. And whether that's the first step of the conversation, I think Tara mentioned it, most people don't say no to being on a podcast. I have had some financial institutions have to say no due to they're not allowed to do it. But that's about it. I think almost everybody else, whether maybe they're too busy or whatnot, but almost everybody is trying to figure out a way to get their name and recognition and company out there. So that's the way we do it. The second piece of that conversation is we're constantly using this to educate our audience or on what we do. So we don't do too much shooting, recording, interviews on the technology cybersecurity side, but we have had new employees come on and ask me questions about things that we do. Thought it would be great to answer it over a podcast or a recording. Then we share that on LinkedIn. And we've seen, I'm going to get pretty salesy right now in terms of data, we've seen our average sales cycle length from somebody that's engaged with our content go from like 90 days down to 30 days. So I can give you some basic understanding of that. We can have a deeper conversation there. But we utilize our podcast to interview experts here in the Northeast area. And number two, I always want to be looked at, some people call it the high school party. Like, how are you I'm not going to be the coolest person in the room, but if I'm the one hosting the party, everybody's going to know my name. And that's how we kind of look at it. I want to be the one hosting the party. During COVID, it's been primarily the podcast. Pre-COVID, even the folks at Define Talent and Define Logic used to come to our Top Golf event and get everybody together. And we were just that center of influence. And I love what we're doing today with that is I want to be the host of the party. I want everybody to, come to us and say, I always like to say, even if it's not tech, you probably have some sort of problem in your business. It may be talent solutions. I got the best person for you in the room. And then I can, even send to that person, here's Tara's episode. Go check it out. And if you like the way she talks about what she does, then I'll make the introduction. So it's just that like next step. So that's how we think about it.
Yeah, for me, because my podcast is focused on people moving abroad, there are tools and resources that they may need. And so by way of that, I've done affiliates. So just being able to get like a small commission on a sale. And those are things like, VPNs, for example. But then moving on to sponsorships, I really, because I'm still at the beginning, I'm only 8 months in, started with my network. And so, our first sponsor was PocStock, which is a company that is primarily focused on creating images, stock images of people of color. And so that was great because we have travel influencers that are part of our community, and they may have photos that they want to sell and make some money off of and things like that. So just being intentional and finding relevant relationships. And as I mentioned earlier, I've done joint ventures where, I've partnered with someone who I've gone through their program and I've endorsed it. And so I typically prefer to do that where it's not like a cold relationship. It's like something that I can validate and say that I've experienced, and that builds my credibility as well. So I've utilized that. I've been able to benefit from some grants. And then also now the podcast marketing course is like the 2021 like big monetization aspect. And then I think on a smaller scale, it's been moving from free webinars to paid webinars, especially like I said, because the content is so specialized. So it will be like how to build a business that can make six figures as a digital nomad, or how to find investment opportunities in South Africa. And so for those, there is a slight monetary cost associated with it. But I think because my group and community is so large, it goes to that saying, those that pay attention. And so being able to not just cast a wide net and say, oh, I'm just doing this. I mean, there's time, there's my time, it's my guest time. It's the value of the information that's provided. It's the cost related to the platforms that I'm using. I have now an editor, a VA, a bookkeeper. All these people need to get paid, one. And two, I still have my Get Out of America fund that I'd like to preserve and grow. So monetization for me is a necessary part of that. And I do have like Patreon and things like that, or Buy Me Coffee. And, there are points. And I also sell merch from time to time, seasonal things like that. So it's really, for me, the joy is testing and learning and seeing what's working, what's relevant, and finding that comfort zone. Also, obviously being respectful to the feedback of my community. And recently we kicked off our first inaugural survey to really understand the needs of our listeners, our community, because those are starting to be two different things, but really using that as an opportunity to gain some insights that would then lead to other opportunities.
Awesome. I think we're right at 10:50, so we have about 10 minutes. I kind of want to do a little bit more of like a rapid fire so we can get a couple more of these in, because there's some really good ones in here. First, from our marketing director, Adele Strauss, she wanted to ask both of you, what's your favorite episode you've done so far? So Tara, we'll start with you.
I'm actually going to say the one recently that we just put up with Andrew Stern from Rumble Boxing. He's the director of talent there and programming, and he's also a co-founder. And for me, as a recruiting agency, it was a different type of individual that I got to talk to, and I got to really dig into how he recruits for his company and how he recruits. And I think for me, it was really awesome to see a very big similarity between the different types of people and how we find the true authentic people in order to, put them forward for me submitting them to clients, or for him having them being a part of his team in order to grow his business. So I think that most recently was my favorite podcast so far.
Awesome. Chrishan.
Ooh, that's hard. They're all my babies. I think, each one is a personal story about someone's journey and transformation. Yeah. But I would say in terms of, I think my latest episode on the house sitting, that was like mind blowing. My guest, Stephanie Perry, who a founder of House Sitter School, like I think she hasn't paid rent in 6 years. She lives abroad and travels the world as a professional house sitter. And she was formerly a pharmacy tech, making a lot of money. So when you think about like, wow, when you even think about your own expenses, usually housing is the first one. And so if you can reduce or eliminate that and travel the world. Yeah. So for me, I was like, wow, that even just changed my formula as I think about, 2023 and sustaining myself. So I think that one, in a close second, I think would be with Deirdre Amola. And that was my first one with a guest with her life in Bali. So those are my two. Snuck in another one.
Love it. One of the coolest one that we've done so far, which was actually for the borough of Hightstown, New Jersey. We had the mayor and kind of their economic development people, but we did it in a brewery, the Hightstown Brewery, that was just getting up and running, and they were still mid-construction with like the big beer tanks coming in and whatnot. And Adele and I had to go out there. We went on site, recorded there. We were like wiring cameras and recorders from a restaurant next door because they had no power. But that was really, really cool. Just a completely out of this world experience in terms of trying to get that to work and the content there. So that was the coolest one on our end. Josh has a question here real quick. Chrishan mentioned batch recordings with some of her episodes filmed in the fall. What do you do if some content information has changed since the recording to the release? So I guess Chrishan right there on how, when you're doing your batch recordings, how quickly are you then getting them out afterwards?
Yeah, so for me, when I finished season 1, which was the last episode aired in November, but I was done recording like early October. And then I started recording for season 2, which started airing in January. I knew I needed to get a good, especially since I released 2 episodes a month, 6 episodes recorded, which would give me 3 months. And then I like to have at least 1 month lead time between. Yeah. So I said, oh, okay, this will give me a breather. So then by, 2.5 months in, I'll start recording again. So the ones that are airing now are closer to, they were recorded in 2021. But to answer the question, there were some episodes where I had to trim out certain things. So we might talk about the presidential election, but then by the time that aired, it already had happened. And so it's really just listening in for some of that. Also, depending on the guest and the type of conversation we're having, I'll say, beginning before we start recording, this episode will likely air around, and kind of give them something to think about in the back of their mind, not to censor them, but in case there's something that they want to say, or even if they want to promote, that might actually change, especially because I batch record, that might even change how I forecasted that episode airing. So if it's something timely related to a guest, I may decide to move them up because they're mentioning something that, is going to drop in like a month. And so that's kind of being nimble and flexible. But that's also one of the benefits of batch recording. It gives me a breather. It gives me time to be more deliberate and intentional. But it just is something that I think is just transformational, that just helps you stay consistent and engaged with your audience.
Love it. And one more, because we have 5 minutes left. John Dry asked, is there a service that can help match you to sponsors? Do you have to do all the legwork, or do they seek you out? And just real quick on my end, I know Tyler Daniels, our podcast producer, there is multiple services that even reach out to us now around finding guests or matching guests. You could be so surprised by how many people have written books or experts. They know this exists. They put their profiles out on these services. I think one is called Podmatch, if I'm remembering that correctly. And now all of a sudden we're getting inbound requests for guests. Chrishan, I'm going to go to you one more time on that same type of thing, but for, I guess, more of a monetization sponsorship perspective.
Yeah, I haven't used them. I know there's Podcorn. I am on there and I'll get notifications about different sponsorship, and they'll tell you kind of lay out what the sponsorship opportunity is and then what the pay might be. And that varies depending on what the ask is in terms of you as a host. And maybe it's a host read and where that appears in your episode. I haven't delved into it too much. And then also I use Buzzsprout as my podcast host. And then they also have a monetization feature. And so if I plug them in the episode, I can just easily click a button. So there are tons of different resources to make that a little easier. And then I believe with Podcorn, it also has a different threshold. But also I will say that there are different affiliates that I've utilized earlier in the journey, although earlier sounds kind of weird, although I'm only 8 months in, but that have then reached out and let me know about new platform changes and things like that. I haven't yet had the time to take advantage of it because I'm literally now 1 week after I finished the first cohort for my podcast marketing course. So I needed a little bit breather. When you're in launch mode, it takes a lot of energy, but I think those are great places to start for sure.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much to our panel of talented guests. And I'm pretty sure that all of these people would love to have you connect with them. As I said, this is our first marketing webinar, not a technical webinar. So if you can see, our presentation went down, but we'll be sharing all of their links on our social media. You can go to Domain Technology Partners if you want to connect. Also, feel free to reach out to Anthony. We'd love to have you on Discussions by Domain. And our final note is going to be the winners of our giveaway. So the AirPod Pros will be going to John Blackburn and Jeff Schultz. I'm sorry if I pronounce anyone's names wrong. So I know you guys can't talk because you are just in the audience, but our team will be reaching out to you to send over your AirPods. So yeah, thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Chrishan. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You guys so much.
See you guys.